Hello, everybody. Brent Hagan here again with a Q&A with Dr. A. Today's topic is stress and stress management because it is Stress Awareness Month. And so what a great topic because, it's been a very stressful few years. I always keep talking about that, but it has been, and it has been for a lot of people. And so I think having a conversation about stress and how important it is, and also how we can be better aware of stress in our lives, and of course and be better at managing it. And if we're better at managing it, then that is our real key to healthy living. So I think this discussion will probably have a lot of things that you're aware of, but some of the physiological changes that happen in our body, I think will make sense to why people end up with certain symptoms and disease. But so just real quick, I know there's some information in our subject line, but I'm talking about 77% of people have disease or symptoms related to stress. And what I can tell you is that back in the days when I did a lot more primary care, most of the conditions or symptoms that people were coming in to see me for could be tied back to stress. And when we look at our overall society's health, you'll see that in every area of disease we have been seeing an increase in cases, and that doesn't matter. I mean, every different symptoms organ system and are all on the rise. And so one of the things that has been very clear in the last 3 years has been stress. That is one thing that's been pretty much ubiquitous across the world, is that we've had a higher amount of stress in this last few years. And so then it probably makes sense that why we have an increase in every area of disease, because that's what stress does. And so it doesn't matter, what you're talking about, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, or mental illness. Every area of disease increased in the last 3 years. And so when you think about that and hear me saying that almost all disease can be tied back to stress, that kind of starts to make you think, going, oh, well, then I need to focus a lot more on stress, how to approach it and how to manage it. And that's exactly right. And that's why we're having this conversation, so everybody can feel like they have some takeaway points that they can start to influence and implement into their own lifestyles, so that they can have a better response to stress and not end up a statistic with symptoms, disease, or worse. And so first off, let's just talk a little bit about stress. What is stress? So really the simplest way to look at stress is just that it is really any sort of any demand, whether mental or physical, that you feel in your life. And so anything, it's anything that you feel is demanding in your life. It could be considered a stress. And so that means you could have good stresses or bad stresses. And so bad stresses are, got this little light in my face. So bad stress, good stresses, our example would be having a party, getting promoted at work, but having a bigger workload. Those are good stresses, I should say. Bad stresses are, death, motor vehicle accidents, being mugged, you name it. There's just so many different considerations when you're looking at good and bad stressors, but all of them create a response in our body, mentally and physically. And so when there is a response in our body, which is normal, that is still considered a stress. So, and people don't realize that when they're really looking at how to manage themselves and trying to figure out what might be causing them to either gain weight, not be able to sleep, various symptoms, and not really understanding stress. So, but by the basics of just understanding that even good stress is still a stress, you can see how when people get to a certain point in stress management, that even good things happening to them can still be too much. They still can't handle it. They feel stressed out, even though it's a good stress. And that will make sense as we start talking about what happens in the body. And so, so hopefully that makes sense. It's just anything that creates a response in the body can be considered a stress. So now you got to imagine that when we talk about good and bad stresses, and when our body is capable of balancing these stressors and what's happening in our bodies, which is our innate responsibility, then it's not, it doesn't affect us too much. So there's those people that just never seem to be stressed out. Well, most of those people either have some genetic gift that allows them to manage stress well, or they have a good coping mechanism. But you can see that it's still something that you have to deal with. And so the key for us when you start looking at stress is realizing that it's tied to disease. You have to be able to recognize it, because if you are looking to maximize your vitality, to maximize your energy, to maximize your happiness, to just feel the best you can, managing stress is the most important thing that you're going to have to figure out. And obviously we're not doing a good job of it as a whole, but I think when you understand why that is, you're going to realize, one, how to get out of it or fix it, but two, it's going to make sense of why sometimes you can't fix it. So let's talk a little bit about what stress does to the body. So let's say, we're not talking about minor stresses here. Let's talk about a major stress, not like, like one of the, some of the major stressors that we're faced. One of the top stressors is moving, and then you have divorce, and then you have childbirth, and you have a lot of different major stressors. But let's go to talk about what happens in our body when we have like a big one. So let's say you get mugged. You're at an ATM machine and someone comes up and pulls a gun on you. Immediately what happens in our body is to ignore everything else that we need physiologically, other than that fight or flight response that that you probably were waiting for me to say. And so think about that, fight or flight. So that means you're either going to fight or you're going to run. And so everything that happens at that moment, whether you're mugged, whether you're in a car accident, whether you see imminent danger, your body is going to start preparing for that fight or flight. And so what happens is there's an area of the brain, it's called the amygdala, and that area of the brain will send a signal to your hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is kind of the command center of our whole body. And so what happens is that sends a signal saying, hey, we have danger. And so what then happens is the hypothalamus is basically saying, okay, I don't care what else is going on going on with you mentally or physically, we're shutting it down, and we are going to get prepared for fighting or fleeing. And so what happens is the hypothalamus then starts to make changes, and it'll start sending out signals to one is to increase our adrenaline, our hormone adrenaline, which is epinephrine. And so when these things happen, epinephrine immediately starts to cause certain actions. One of them is to increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure, your respiratory rate will go up, and that's because if your respiratory rate goes up, now you're bringing more oxygen and nutrients to your brain and your muscles. Most importantly, brain and muscles, because those are the two things you need. You need your brain to be more aware and sense and heighten senses, so you can make the best decisions for yourself to get out of the circumstance, and then nutrients and oxygen to your muscles, because you're either going to have to fight or run. And so when you can see what's happening, you can see that your body is just changing. It doesn't matter. It's not bringing blood to your gut. It's not bringing blood to anywhere else. It's trying to get sugar, take any means, whether that it needs to create energy. So it is basically pumping out sugar and taking it from any process it can so that we're ready. So you can see that the stress response is taking every bit of resources that we need to fix that problem. And so after that's done, if whatever the demand was or whatever the stress was is gone, then things start to go back to normal. If it's not gone, at that point, the command center says, wait, we need more. Then it sends another signal out to your adrenal glands, and this is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal and then gonadal axis, the adrenal axis. And so now it sends a signal to the adrenal glands to put out cortisol. And cortisol is another fight or flight response hormone. And so when cortisol is out, again, its main goal is to prepare us to fight or run. And so now you have another hormone involved. And so, the body stays in this heightened response, and these hormones and cytokines, which they're pro-inflammatory chemicals in our body, and neurotransmitters and hormones. All these signals are going throughout our body, doing all these things, to basically get us to survive. Some of the other things that I talk about cytokines is, and some of these other signalers is one other thing it does is it reduces our pain modulation. So you can see that, when people get in car wrecks or they get in fights, they don't even know they are injured. And it's kind of that whole concept, I don't have time to bleed. You're so engaged in just survival that you don't even realize that you're cut or you have a broken bone, because you're using all your resources for survival. So one of the tactics in our body is to take away our pain modulation, or even our understanding that we have pain. And so, your pupils dilate, your senses are all heightened, everything is going to fix this. So after that, the HPA has, been signaled, and we still, at that point, are needing more resources. Our body is going to just continue to fight and continue to pull all of our resources until that demand is gone, or until we, either pass out, which is another compensatory mechanism. It's, when we have bad leg wounds or wounds that we're bleeding, that's what makes people pass out, because they're conserving blood for the brain. It's all innate responses. So now once that demand is gone, or that stress is gone, what happens is that, well, let me first say, the other part of the fight or flight, besides all those hormones, is the part of the autonomic nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system. That is the fight or flight response of our nervous system, which is also supporting that hypothalamus to epinephrine and adrenal glands to pump up those hormones. So, so the sympathetic nervous system is kind of like the gas pedal when you have a stress. And then to turn it off, you have the parasympathetic nervous system and other signaling that the hypothalamus will send out, other signalers and chemicals to make the body stop and go back into balance. And so the parasympathetic nervous system and the neurotransmitter GABA, whereas the sympathetic nervous system and neurotransmitter glutamate. And so GABA, the parasympathetic nervous system, starts to bring down our bodies back into balance. And then at that point, hopefully we can cope and everything goes back to normal. But what about for those people that the demand doesn't go away, or this repetitive nature of stress just continues to happen and you can't shut it off, and your parasympathetic nervous system and all those signalers can't turn it off? Or you start having a response to stress like getting mugged, but it's happening because you have, you got called into work, or you have to work an extra shift, or you have a big project at school, and it's kicking off this type of stress response. So just remember all the things that happen when you are under that stress. All the things happen from your heart rate, your blood pressure, your respiratory rate, oxygen consumption, nutrient consumptions, inflammatory chemicals that just are making inflammation, because that's what happens. So if you can't shut that off, you eventually, this fight or flight response keeps going and going and going, and you can imagine there's going to be consequences, because if you can't go back into balance and you're having this inflammation and you're having this body just constantly putting out hormones to put you in the fight or flight response, you're eating up all your nutrients. The hormones that are being constantly secreted are ones that are also going to end up causing problems, because if you're not in a fight or flight response situation, so say you just got told that you have to have a project done and you go into this response, well, that your body is not using up those resources that are being released. And so what is that going to feel like? Well, that feels like anxiety, or that feels like people feel like they're tremulous, they feel they start putting on they're not able to sleep because they have too much cortisol circulating through their blood. But you can see eventually they'll start, your adrenal glands won't have the resources, you don't have the nutrients, because you're not able to catch up with the demands of the stress and the physiological and mental response to the stress, that it gets you into this vicious cycle where you end up eventually not able to get the same response from your adrenal glands, from from epinephrine, from cortisol, from your sympathetic tone, from all these signalers. There's just nothing there anymore. They don't have the nutrients that it needs to stop that response. And so eventually you're going to start getting symptoms and disease. And that's why I was saying that all disease, or most disease, is tied back to stressors. Because the other part that happens with stress is that when all these things are happening, the basic concept of stress is energy demand. And so you can see we're talking about all these hormones and all these neurotransmitters that are being really pushed to their maxes. But you also have also have an energy problem, because all of those things consume energy. Everything that you're doing with stress response takes up energy. So you can imagine, as people get more and more stressed out, they get more and more tired. So as your energy demand goes up and your ability to create more energy goes down, you start to get into an energy deficit, and that's what the mitochondria do is they put out the energy in your body. But when mitochondria become damaged from chronic or being reintroduced to stressors, you eventually have the mitochondrial dysfunction, which is your energy producers. You don't have the nutrients. Your adrenal glands have really exhausted all of its cortisol and other hormones, and you start getting into that crisis. And so that is like one of the main things that we're going to talk about when we look at solutions is the energy demand. And that's really the most simple way you can look at this, is if you're under chronic stress, your body is using up all your stress resources. Your body needs energy for everything we do in our body. Physically, physiologically, mentally, everything needs energy. And so that's the simple way to look at it, is if you have too much stress, you can't manage your stress, you're eventually going to be in an energy deficit. That's it. You can think of it that way. You can tie that to mitochondria, which is our energy producing cells in our body. But that's basically what our struggles will be, because when you start having chronic stressors, and think about the diseases that are associated with chronic stress. So you have this fight or flight response that just keeps going. You start not being able to put it back into balance. So think of the things that are going to happen. People are going to start having symptoms of not being able to sleep. When they can't sleep, then they're taking naps during the day. Their cortisol being released all the time is going to start affecting how our blood sugars are working, and how our insulin is affecting our utilization of blood sugar or glucose. And we can start gaining weight, especially in the midriff area. We're going to start having fatigue because we have an energy deficit. You can start having, when you're not getting the deep stages of sleep, you don't have energy. You're going to start exercising less. You're going to start eating either more, but the wrong foods, or you're going to be eating less and not getting enough nutrients. So this is going to lead to sexual dysfunction. And of course, you know that this also is necessary for making neurotransmitters, but also, just not having energy, which is good, and not being able to have the same sexual relationships. All this tension, everything leads to depression, obviously anxiety. That sense of that fight or flight response is kind of what people feel, that anxiousness, and it can be very severe. And so it kind of should make sense, though, that when this just keeps going on and on and on, and you can't stop it, your body's balancing system is completely shut down, and eventually you start getting symptoms, you start getting disease, and then your options at that point are to start doing everything you can to self-correct, or you go see a doctor to see, hey, these are the symptoms I'm having. I can't sleep, I'm depressed, my energy's low. What can you do for me? And so in a normal situation, what would happen is you go to the doctor, and the doctor, of course, is going to say, okay, well, sorry you're depressed, sorry you can't sleep. Here's a medicine for your sleep. Here's a medicine for your depression. Come back in 6 weeks, 3 months, whatever. Let me know if you have any other issues. So now we're already in a position where we're trying to get out of it. And so what medicines can do is make you sleep, but it's not changing your sleep cycle, and it's not changing the things necessary for your innate ability to sleep. Some of these pharmaceuticals will also worsen some of the micronutrient deficiencies, because remember, we're burning through all these nutrients just to power our body. And then once we get into this position where we start having symptoms and disease, usually it's very hard for people to get out of it, because they've already started not having the energy resources to be able to do that. So now think about that. So when we talk about why some people can't get out of that stress response, and then next thing you know, they're not really looking at this stress causes, they're looking at the diseases that they've been told they had, whether it's all sorts of diseases, high blood pressure, insomnia, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, sexual arousal disorder, erectile dysfunction, we can think of migraines, headaches, fatigue, irritable bowel syndrome. All these things start as a result of chronic stress. And so now you have these diseases and you're being treated for these diseases, which again, they're not they're not giving you the pieces of what you need to actually get yourself out of the hole. And so instead you're just stuck in this rut, and the majority of our population is in there. I would say 70 to 80% of the population, just like that statistic when we started, are all in this spot where they just kind of feel like they're stuck and they can't get out of it. 80% of our population is over their ideal weight. We're closing in on that above 60% of the population on some sort of psychiatric medicine to help with anxiety or depression, because you can see now why that is, because we're all stuck in this chronic pattern of stress and inability of our bodies to bring it back down to balance, so that our stress response actually can manage to keep our bodies in balance. And so what do we do with that? It's how do we really break this cycle? And in a lot of cases, it can be challenging, but yet it's completely doable, and we're going to talk about how. And so just kind of a little summary of what I just said before we start getting into, well, how do we correct this? And so remember, you get stress. Usually we can manage stress. So at the beginning, when we're younger, stress doesn't bother most people as much when we're younger, because those types of stressors aren't usually big stressors. But even as we start to age, our ability to manage stress is just easier because we have more tools, we have more resources. Our bodies are balanced better. We haven't had exposures and changes in hormones that happen with age, so we're better equipped to manage stress. So those stressors just kind of bounce off of us. But then as we get to a point where now these stressors become bigger, now women have had kids, women have had periods where hormones are growing up and down, men start having jobs and they start having to be a father, they start having to be a dad and work all day long. All these things start to accumulate, and then as we start to hit around 35, our hormones start to decline, and then it even adds it takes away more of our tools to balance stress. So then now the stress, as they build up, if we're not doing the things we need to do to manage the stress, eventually you're going to get chronic stress. And when you have chronic stress, you can remember that starts using up all of these resources. And when those start to happen, very silently and very progressively, we start changing our lifestyle habits. So now we're not eating as good, we stop exercising as much because we're burning up all of our resources, losing our energy. And so you start you can only do what you can do. So you start cutting out the things that you just can't do because you just don't have the energy or you don't have the motivation. And so now all of a sudden you're changing your lifestyle. So the sleep changes, the exercise changes, your diet changes, hormones have already changed. And so now you can see why you start getting and then don't forget micronutrients, because I told you we eat up nutrients from our stress response. So now we in this position where all of our kind of our pillars of lifestyle or of good health are being effective: sleep, diet, exercise, hormones, and micronutrients. And so when you're in that position now, you're going to be starting to get symptoms or starting to get disease. And so then you go see the doctor, and remember to go to the doctor is going to give you most of their solutions are pharmaceutical. Those pharmaceuticals are either band-aids or temporary solutions, but yet no real solutions. And so now you're on medicine, you have all these conditions. Even if these medicines are keeping some of these conditions in control, the condition is still abnormal. They're controlling a condition that hasn't been cured or changed or repaired. Instead, you're on a medicine now to manage it, but you're not out of the woods here. So in a lot of cases, these pharmaceuticals actually can cause more micronutrient deficiencies, and then eventually, they have drug interactions, and then some of them cause weight gain, some can cause headaches, some can cause the list of side effects that they rattle off when they talk about meds. So you can see the other option at that point, if you don't go to the doctor, is to self-correct. And now remember, to self-correct means you have to have the mental capability to do all these things differently. But guess what? You can't stop that tape of life. Every morning you get up and boom, you're back in it. So how are you going to get the energy you need? When we talk about energy is gone, you're already in an energy deficit. How are you going to get the energy you need to start doing, reversing this on your own and try to get back to that point where you were managing stress regularly, your body would go into balance. Everything was functioning well. You weren't as reactive. You could take on different stressors, good stressors, bad stressors, and your body response was normal. So now you're in the spot where you're kind of stuck, and so that's what we were talking about. And there's reason now when you sit there and everyone gets into that mindset, like, I'll do this tomorrow, I'll start tomorrow. They know they need to make changes to their lifestyle. They know that there's solutions that they could be doing to better their scenario, but yet they don't have the energy, don't have the motivation. Their ambition starts to go away. You really just become hopeless. And that is that vicious cycle you get stuck in. And so much of the population is stuck in there. And so now you can see why most disease is tied to stress, because once it starts trickling down all these effects and you start affecting your mitochondria and your energy production, you're in a hole that you really have to find certain ways to get out of. And so now thinking about that, stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, and disease. And so I really believe that all chronic illness has a tie into mitochondrial dysfunction, which again has a tie into stress. So now we know that. Now let's take a little bit of time to speak about what are the solutions, because obviously that is our conversation today, is talk about stress awareness and management. So now we know what stress is. So now how to get out of stress is the key. This is a conversation, and just letting you know, this is not, depending on how far down this spiraling vicious cycle you are, will depend on how aggressive you have to be. And but it's doable. You just have to be aware. And so one of the first keys to managing stress is understanding it. And now that we've talked about it, you guys can see there's good stress, there's bad stress. So knowing that there's good stress and bad stress, you have to be prepared for both of them. But most importantly is just recognizing these types of stresses, your work, your home, and your social life, all of those things. You have to start picking and choosing as you start trying to dig yourself out of this stress management hole, and start deciding what you're going to put on your plate, and start getting yourself organized to take on this battle. And so, let's start looking at the options. And so when we start saying that really stress management, when you get yourself into this vicious cycle, it's really energy. So we'll just start and leave it at there. So everything that we're focused on is energy production. So if our bodies used all of our energy during that course of stress management and used up all of our nutrients and our hormones, and our glands are not functioning the same, we have to get energy back so that it can start creating more hormones, creating more neurotransmitters, being able to bring that parasympathetic tone, or the sympathetic tone down by GABA and parasympathetic nervous system, so that we can start winning this battle again. So when we're talking about energy, that means we have to make corrections to start producing energy. So as we said before, that everything that in our lifestyle, all the different components of our lifestyle had been negatively affected by chronic stress. Well, all of those pillars of health or lifestyle characteristics have to be addressed. So now sleep, diet, exercise, hormones, and micronutrients all need to be fixed. And so how do you fix that? Well, when it's acutely happened to you, so where this vicious cycle has just started, so you haven't gained a bunch of weight, you're just starting to have some of the symptoms of insomnia, fatigue, you're starting to get depressed, you're starting to get a little worked up and stressed, you can do some self-correcting and start to make the right decisions to get you out of this hole. And yes, it's going to take a little work, yes, it's going to take a little discipline, but you can do it. And so you have to do the opposite of what you stop doing, which is you got to get back in the gym. You got to start working on your diet. You have to start supplementing micronutrients. And if you're working on your sleep, you're working on your diet, you're working on your exercise, you got supplements coming in, you can start to kind of dig yourself out of the hole, and then hormones will start to balance with time. So that's the approach. And in the beginning, if you're having a hard time with motivation or having a hard time with energy, there are products for that. There are things that you can do to get you that energy and motivation, and it's all front loaded. You're just trying to get out of the hole, get out of the muck, and start running again. And once you're off and running again, you don't have to put as much efforts, resources into the whole process. Now, if you're farther along down this whole, stress management situation, like say you're already on blood pressure medicine, say they already have you on antidepressants, you're on sleeping pills, you're on, now you have the first stages of diabetes. If you're down that far and really struggling to get out of the hole, you might need a little bit more aggressive measures. You might need to get a hormone evaluation. You might need a few extra therapies to help get you moving. And sometimes, you got to think of the mental part of it, is if you just are stuck and you just cannot get your brain to make your body do things, then there are even other solutions for that. But there's always a way out, and it just takes a little bit of hard work. And so let's talk about some of these products and see. So, now that to beat stress is lifestyle. That is the key. That is that is going to be the conversation we have every single time someone talks about ways to beat disease, beat stress, manage the body, try to prevent disease in the future, is all going to come down to lifestyle. And lifestyle is going to be what pulls you out of this vicious cycle and puts you in a positive cycle. So what can you do? Well, we just talked about sleep, diet, exercise, micronutrient deficiencies, and hormones. And so, like, when we look at why we have this whole platform, a wellness-based telehealth solution, is because the whole program, the whole platform has tons of solutions that you can utilize to get yourself out of this hole. And that's the beauty of it, is everybody can get out of the hole. It just means you have to be aware of the stressors, be aware of your situation, and realize that you are capable of achieving so much mentally and physically through natural means or alternative medicines. Doesn't mean that you don't need traditional medicines at the beginning. If your blood pressure's high, if your blood sugars are out of control, if you can't sleep, yes, you might need medications for that if you're down that far. But there's still ways that you can introduce these measures, and then over time try to get off of those pharmaceuticals and try to get back to where your body is doing what it's supposed to do, and that is the innate responsibility it has, and you can get there without needing pharmaceuticals to support you. So let's just talk about the energy side of things. So we talk about, what are our options out there, especially from telewellness. What are some of the therapies that can help me manage stress and get me out of this hole that, so I can my body better is more responsive to stressors, so that I can, you can sleep better, have more energy, have more sex, have more, be happier, and be able to prevent disease in the future. And so let's just talk about one of the things that we discussed, which is that stress response and how it just eats up nutrients. And so first off, you just have to think about nutrients. And back in the day, we called them nutrients, supplements. But now you can imagine, just with how much stress everyone has and how much of these nutrients you're burning through, some of these nutrients are actually more of a requirement. And you're going to hear me say that a lot. So, some of the nutrients that are really aggressively used up by our stress response are B vitamins, especially B5, B6, and B12, and B3, niacin or niacinamide, or NAD, nicotinic adenine dinucleotide, and then vitamin C, zinc, and magnesium. And so these are kind of the four that are really, really utilized in this stress response. And so what do you need, of course, is to supplement them. And so that is the first thing you think, okay, I got to get on some nutrient supplements. These things are going to help, support my further stress, stress utilization. Because remember, once you get to this point, your ability to mount a stress response is limited because you don't have the tools. So you have to start feeding it. So these nutrients, like the B vitamins, are going to, they're what help that whole metabolic pathway of pushing glucose into your cells and glucose metabolism. And B vitamins are also important for creating our neurotransmitters like serotonin. And then you have magnesium, which is our relaxation mineral. Zinc is used up for our immune function, again, because of energy. So when we don't have energy, all of these things get depleted because our immune system's going, everything is going, trying to just get us through the day, where our adrenal glands aren't putting out our necessary responses, and so we're eating away at our other hormones just to survive, and it just continues to cause us to be in an energy deficit. So B vitamins, vitamin C is actually necessary to managing cortisol, but it's also used up when we're in our fight or flight response. So we start getting deficient in C, we start getting deficient in Bs, start getting deficient in magnesium and zinc, which then affects blood pressure, our immune response, our stress response. And so you can see that's one easy start. Get some supplements on board. We have a lot of nutrient injections, which again, when you're dealing with stress, even absorption of your gut, your acid production, is all questionable, and that's why it leads to irritable bowel and inflammatory bowel disease and just total body inflammation. So doing it by injection makes sense, again, just at the beginning, just for the first 3 to 6 months to try to get you out of that hole. And we have tons of different nutrient injections that have B vitamins in it, that have magnesium, that have vitamin C. So these are things that we can find, and you can start doing them in injectable format, so you get 100% bioavailability, and you don't have to worry about your gut. I could talk all day about infusions and injections versus oral supplementation, but just understand that there are reasons why we inject certain nutrients and other peptides into our bodies, is just because we want to remove the variable of absorption in our gut health. So then moving on, so you're now looking at, if you really are wanting to try to push hard at the beginning, is remember the mitochondria. This is a stress disorder and an energy disorder. So whatever we can do, it'd be great if we could just take a syringe of ATP or energy molecules and just inject it into us. But we don't have that anymore. We used to have ADP, which was a precursor to ATP, but we do have plenty of nutrient or energy molecules that we can utilize, both peptides and nutrients. So one of the ones that is going to be a hot topic and constantly being talked about is NAD. And so what NAD is basically a byproduct of our mitochondrial function. It's a derivative of niacin. And so what basically NAD is an electron donor, and what it's responsible for is energy, repairing our DNA, turning off gene expression, and also all right, sorry, I'm getting signal about time. Is to repair DNA, and it's our biggest utilizer of NAD is our immune function. And so you can see how we just start burning through our NAD, and then we start getting into an energy crisis. So NAD is a great one. It's done by injection. You can do home injection kits, and you're basically putting NAD in. So that's going to be my number one suggestion is NAD. The second one that's really good is called MOTS-c, and it's a mitochondrial derived peptide so you just heard me, mitochondrial derived peptide. And so what it does is it works predominantly in our skeletal muscles. And so our skeletal muscles is a big storage form of carbohydrates. And so what it does is goes in there and it helps manage our utilization of glucose. It pushes glucose into the cells, and it basically gives us an ability to increase our energy and our insulin sensitivity and our glucose management without spiking our insulin. And that's exactly what exercise does. So you're going to see that MOTS-c is a mitochondrial peptide that can improve our metabolism. So so once you're mitochondrial, you have an increase in mitochondrial function, you're going to have improvements in metabolism, weight management, neurotransmitter formation, bone health. And so that's another good one. I'm gonna have to speed up here. Epitalin is another complete. It's really not a mitochondrial peptide, but what it does is it mimics this a naturally occurring peptide or enzyme in our brain called epitalin. And what it does is it really, just think of it as it kind of goes in and balances out your hypothalamus, the control center. So it works at the hypothalamus and through your pineal gland to just make the hypothalamus work better. And so now you're making your command center, turning it into a better functioning gland that's going to control the rest of the body. And so those are a few of them, epitalin, NAD, MOTS-c, any of the growth hormone stimulators, because growth hormone will be immediately affected once your cortisol is always spiked and turned on. So you'll start getting a quicker decline in growth hormone. So any of the growth hormone stimulators or secretors like CJC, ipamorelin, sermorelin, Ibutamoren, all of these will be helpful. So I think those are the main ones, but just remember for you guys that all of these things can be utilized, and it's just to get you out of the hole. Once you're out of the hole and you're running again, you don't have to spend so much money on getting you out of the hole. Wellness is front loaded. So just you always have to think of that. If you're not in that position where you're as happy and healthy as you want to be, you're going to have to put some resources into getting you there. But once you're there, sleep, diet, and exercise is free. Supplement prices go down. You don't need injections as much anymore. You start to see that you start balancing out this investment you have to get you to the point where you want to be. But when you get to that point, of feeling great, being happy, being at your ideal weight, having the energy you want, it's priceless. And so every penny is worth you getting out of the hole. And so we have a lot of experience in this. And so you guys have any questions, we got medical support, we have protocols. I mean, this stuff works. And so if you want to start being able to get back control of your stress, and you got to be aware of it, and you have to put the things in place to get you to where your body's innate ability is there. So anyway, that was a lot, and I can keep talking, but I have another meeting. So anyway, that is a Q&A with Dr. A. Happy Stress Awareness Month, and you guys go out there and kick some butt and manage your stress. Thank you.